Well, good morning, and thank you for attending this session. And so this session is going to be focused on cannabis payment solutions and the various challenges and how do you choose and how do you obtain these payment products. And so these sessions are relatively short today. They're 20 minutes, and so I'd like to leave about 5 minutes for questions. And although it's a very complicated subject and can take a lot more time than the time allowed here for this presentation, feel free to reach out to me, afterwards or on LinkedIn, and I'm more than happy to have more in-depth conversations or specific situations with you. So my name is Andre Herrera, and I've been in financial services over 30 years now. 18 of those, I was Chief Information Officer of a bank in California. I've also run very large payment systems, stored value systems, credit cards, debit cards, merchant acquiring, ACH. So I have a lot of experience in those types of businesses. I've been working with the cannabis space since 2014, and I've actually helped about 30 different financial institutions stand up their cannabis banking programs. We also have a lot of experience with banks, credit unions, and banking regulators. So just briefly about Hyper, most of you know about the company. We've been producing products that help banks and credit unions on the compliance side, as well as payment solutions. This is not a commercial presentation, and I'm not going to get into specific commercial products, but we are going to touch on the different types of payment products that are out in the marketplace. So as an overview, we're going to go through the different types of cannabis payment solutions. We're going to talk about some of the risks that are involved in accepting electronic payments. We're going to talk about some of the legal considerations. So there are some legal issues out there that you need to be aware of, and we'll go through a couple of cases just to have for discussion. And then we're going to talk about how do you actually go and choose a payment solution? How do you go and weed through all the different types of solutions that are out in the marketplace and find one that is best suited for your business? So I'd like to touch just briefly on legislation. And we've got the Safe Banking Act that has literally been around for years at this point. Also, there is discussion on the outright federal legalization of cannabis. A lot of people think that this is going to be the silver bullet, that once the Safe Banking Act passes, that it will immediately open up all banking to operators. And that's not necessarily the case. I know SAFE has been around for a while, and I'm not actually convinced that it's going to pass anytime soon. Do I think that there is going to be some banking legislation that will be forthcoming? I'm going to say yes. However, the crystal ball as far as the timing on that is cloudy, at best. Many of us thought that there would already be something in place from a federal government standpoint that would have more details on cannabis banking and cannabis financial solutions, but that just hasn't been the case. Really the only federal operative document is the FinCEN guidance from February of 2014. And that's the only thing that exists. So there's not a lot of federal guidance regarding the banking of cannabis or providing financial services and vis-a-vis payments. So let's talk about the different payment types first. So you have open loop, closed loop, and then what I call like semi-open or semi-closed. So an open loop system is going to be like a MasterCard or Visa, something that you can go and you can purchase product at a variety of different merchants at a variety of different locations. A closed loop system is something that can only be used within a certain ecosystem. So an example would be a gift card from a restaurant. So if you have that restaurant gift card, you can only go to that restaurant and make a purchase there. So you can't take that card and go to the hardware store and make your purchases or buy gasoline with it. And then we have something what I call semi-open or semi-closed, and that's more of a dual function. And it's often used to circumvent regulations. And so an example would be to where you use a credit card to load a closed loop card, and then that closed loop card is utilized for the purchase of cannabis. Common rails. All right, so you've got your debit card and credit card branded networks. Examples of those are going to be, of course, MasterCard, Visa, Amex, and Discover. The only problem with those networks is that they have all prohibited cannabis transactions on their networks, both debit and credit. So if it is a MasterCard, Visa, Discover, Amex owned network, both on the debit card side and on the credit card side, those networks have prohibited cannabis transactions. You have the Federal Reserve Bank, and think about that as just traditional banking products. So that's going to be, this anywhere from writing checks to ACH from the electronic side. Probably ACH is the most common there. And then as far as like an alternative kind of rail, you've got the digital currencies. And so you got all your cryptos that are involved in those types of rails. So let's start digging into common solutions that are out in the marketplace. And I put bank and fintech, together. So, banks are usually a little bit behind the curve as far as technology. It's those fintechs that are more innovators. It's the fintechs that are producing the more high-tech types of solutions. But you have to mention bank in there too, because a bank has to be behind the scenes. And so you might have a fintech company that is putting out a solution for payments, but somewhere in that ecosystem, a bank has to exist. Somewhere in that system, you've got to be able to get your money or send money. And so because of that, you're still going to have a bank in the picture. However, you do have these fintech companies that are being a little bit more creative. And you might be hearing a term called banking as a service. And so that's something that's kind of new, to where the banks are trying to say, all right, hey, we're going to provide services and help these fintech companies in getting solutions to the marketplace. So you've got branded credit cards and the branded debit cards. As I mentioned a moment ago, those are prohibited transactions. And so although you do see those out in the marketplace, you do see companies that are accepting credit cards and branded debit cards for their cannabis purchases. Know that those are prohibited transactions. As the networks are finding those, they are going in and they're closing down those programs. Now, it is a bit of what I'll call like a whack-a-mole. So it's not easy for MasterCard and Visa to be able to police and monitor the entire cannabis world. However, that is the case. You've got old school ATM machines, plain old cash. The consumer goes, they put in their ATM card, they pull out cash, they make a purchase. The downside of that is now we're dealing in cash. It's not electronic. And then, of course, you've got the issue of ATM fees. You've got ACHs, and so that's just like your typical direct deposit, or if you're doing a bill pay electronically. You've got cryptocurrencies. You even have things like gold and precious metal solutions, to where people are trading those types of things to make cannabis purchases. One thing I want to touch on in a little bit more detail, though, is the reverse ATM machines. They're also called like script machines or cashless ATMs. Some of the issues there, one is from an operational standpoint, you're usually rounding up transactions or having to deal with cashback situations. And a lot of that round up to the nearest dollar, sometimes to the nearest $5, is to make it look like an ATM machine. Many of these solutions are not transparent. And so if you've got a transaction of $45.32, well, then it's apparent that that was not a cash dispensing ATM machine. Other issues is that a lot of times the fees to the consumers when they use a cashless ATM, those are out of network kind of fees. And so the operator may have a fee, the consumer's bank may give the consumer a fee. So the fees can start getting pretty high, to that consumer. One of the biggest things, though, is transparency. A lot of the banks that are sponsoring these types of transactions are unaware that they are being used for cannabis transactions. I had the opportunity, a bank asked me to take a look at their ATM portfolio and just ask my opinion, was there any cannabis in there? And in short order, I identified, quite a bit of cannabis activity in there. It's really surprising that I found like a lot of barber shops are selling cannabis. So a lot of businesses are being camouflaged. They're being set up as, a jewelry store, barber shop, consulting company, in order to try to camouflage the cannabis transactions. So what are the risk factors? As I just mentioned, many cannabis payment solutions are established under false pretenses. You see a lot of holding companies out there, or if you go to do a transaction, is not the name of the cannabis store, it's some other name that's being utilized. I've seen receipts where it says your transaction will say Jerry's brownies or something like that. So it'll be something that is other than the actual cannabis location. Potential money laundering. And so if you are operating under false pretenses, you have that kind of risk. You also have the risk of facilitating fraud, risk of lawsuits, and also you've got a lot of offshore. And so I put in here reliance on processors or offshore financial institutions are not a given. And so you have some overseas banks that will think, all right, well, cannabis is legal federally, or at least legal where they are, so it's fine to offer my solutions in the US, and that's not necessarily the case. So just a couple of quick case studies. Of course, Ease had their issues, and Ease brought in a couple of different things there. One is that you had a competitor to Ease that came in and filed a lawsuit against the company saying, hey, it's unfair. You're taking credit cards, even though you shouldn't be, and we're not taking credit cards. We're trying to follow by the network rules, and it's unfair to that business. And what that really did is it just drew a lot of attention to that whole ecosystem, that whole payment system. And so the government came in and they filed a fraud lawsuit against those payment operators. And after going through the trial, they were actually convicted, and one individual received 15 months in federal prison. The other received 30 months in there. And so it is not something that you want to take lightly. And by selecting the wrong payment solution, you get pulled in to those types of lawsuits. So I'd like to talk about banking fraud versus illegal cannabis banking. So technically, providing any kind of banking service to a cannabis operator is federally illegal. But banking fraud is a different type of view on this. And I'm seeing more of the government lawsuits and more emphasis on, all right, we're not going to come at you because it's cannabis. We're going to come after you because it is banking fraud. And another interesting case to note is there was an operator that sued a payment solution because they were blacklisted. And basically any operator that is in the MasterCard Visa arena risks being blacklisted because cannabis payments are prohibited and they are taking those transactions on. And so an operator was surprised that we're blacklisted, even though that they were violating the rules. So violating the rules can get you blacklisted. So even when MasterCard and Visa gets turned on and legal, that it will, you'll have trouble obtaining an account. Payment problems in general, you don't want to lie to a bank or credit union. You've got penalties up to 30 years and $1 million fines. I mentioned that whack-a-mole with the branded card network. So a lot of payment solutions get closed down on a regular basis, and then they'll pop up under a different name. But still, that's very difficult for the operators. You want a sustainable solution for payments. You don't want to be making changes and be training and then dealing with all the accounting issues. You've got investor lawsuits, payment companies out of business, monies that are being lost, monies overseas, credit card payments being disguised as carbonated drinks, dog toys, and different things like that. So you got to be watching for different types of those kinds of payment problems. All right, pitfalls to avoid. Lack of transparency. So if there's a big lack of transparency in that whole ecosystem, does the bank know about it? Does the processor know about it? How is it appearing on a cardholder's statement? How does it look to a cardholder, or how does it look to a consumer? You have third-party payment processors. Is your money getting more frequent flyer miles than you are? So is your money getting traveled all around the world, and really where is it? Indirect relationships. Beware of those branded card networks, offshore banks and processors. Anything that looks like their compliance is not adequate for cannabis. Got to be careful about that. Shell companies hiding the true nature. And then, of course, think about your customer. You have those high consumer fees in there. And as I mentioned, the time period is very short to try to cover the subject. And feel free to reach out to me for additional questions, or if you have a question, you can place it in the Q&A. But my contact information is right there. We literally only have about 30 seconds, but if you have a quick question, I can answer it online, or you can reach out to me separately, and I'm more than happy to have a detailed discussion on specific types of solutions, if you would like. So that being said, we've got about 20 seconds. And so if I see a question in the next 20 seconds, I will answer it. Otherwise, we will be at a time's up scenario. And great. So I thank everyone for their time today, and I hope you have a good rest of your day, and take care.